I'm Amber Corin with C4ISRnet. Thank you for joining us for our Army Network Modernization Roundtable. Today I'm here with PEO C3T's Gary Martin, Army CIO G6's Major General Garrett Yee, and Communications and Electronic Command Larry Mazzello. Thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate it. So today we're going to get an update on network modernization from each of your distinctive perspectives. I'll go ahead and jump in. I've got lots of questions for you guys. I'll start with you, Mr. Martin. We know that simplification is, a key tenet to what you're doing and a main network modernization priority. Can you talk about what the PEO is doing to simplify the network for use in the Army?
Sure. I'll highlight a couple of initiatives that we're taking on initially, and then talk about some longer-term initiatives. So today, our tactical network has much of the same technology that we use in the enterprise, home station, office, and so forth. The challenge, however, is that we don't have the same infrastructure of people to operate and man this stuff. Also, the complexity that most of our networks are not fiber, but they're satellite, radio-based communications, requires that a lot of these systems be configured and preset with information on spectrum access, the IP addresses, subnets, and so forth. And the volume of capacity that we provide in terms of numbers of nodes requires a tremendous amount of touch labor. So in the near term, over the next 6 months, we are going to automate the ability to over-the-air provision our radios. So soldiers will be able to, from a NetOps tool, a laptop, from the G6 section, be able to completely configure all the radios in the tactical network without physically going out and touching the radios. This will also provide the ability to do over-the-air rekeying and reconfiguration of the network. So this simple solution ought to significantly unburden the touch labor required. In terms of managing the various virtual machines that are inside the Tactical Operations Center, that's where we have all of our mission command applications. These also today are fairly manually intensive in terms of configuring the virtual machines and the DDS servers and everything that goes into that server stack. We are developing script capabilities, so the soldiers will now be able to essentially execute the script and bring the entire server up to a known good configuration, cutting about 70 hours worth of work from a brigade level tactical operations center. Over the long term, we're looking to automate the ability to security patch these capabilities through automated means, much like you would have in home station today. That's going to take a little bit more work and a little bit more infrastructure, but the whole focus of this is unburdening the soldier and making it much more simple to use and almost automated in terms of configuration.
That was something that I was going to ask you about when you were talking about the over-the-air capabilities. Will pushing security patches be one of those capabilities?
In the near term, it's going to be wired in terms of bring all the vehicles to a central location and from a central device be able to completely patch the software. In the next 3 years, we're looking to automate and do over-the-air patching, particularly for the WinT assets, and then the command and control applications that are in the talk tied to the WinT systems. In terms of patching software radios, that's not going to be achievable in the near term.
Understood. Thank you. So Major General Yee, I know Army CIO G6 is a leading office on network modernization. I know that you're in charge of network modernization there. Can you talk about some of the key challenges that the Army's facing as you're modernizing the network, and what steps you're taking to address those challenges?
Yeah, that's a great question, Amber. It's a huge project that we've undertaken over the last couple of years, and so funding is a big part of the challenge to move and accelerate the pace of transformation to this new modern network that we have. That's one. And another is culture. And let's just talk about the culture that we have right now that we're going through this transformation. When we stood up the Army's networks years and years ago, we stood it up in a series of separate networks based upon the base, camp, or installation, and they were all their own little center of the world that connected directly out to the outside world, in effect. And over the past couple of years, as we bring it under this modernization transformation effort, we're bringing them all together into one standard architecture, which means that those individual base camps and stations no longer have the kind of control over their local network that they used to have when we first stood these networks up years and years ago. So culturally, that's a big change. To have a lot of control of your little base, to you have to give it up to to a centralized security effort. Now there's still decentralized execution, but a lot more centralized and standardized base operations for the network in general. So that is the big challenge from a personnel standpoint. From a funding standpoint, under the current situation that we're in, we can't move as fast as we'd like to. Now the DoD has directed us to modernize and get done with this project by FY19, and we are on track to do that. But that's not without a lot of extra effort going into ensuring that we do it right. And by the way, when we hit FY19, it's a joint network. It's not just the Army's network. It's really shared transport, shared security architecture. So we're already talking, Army, Air Force, beginning this month, and then Navy coming on board in a couple of months. And so when we're talking about the joint information environment, we are already in it, as we've just migrated 21 bases to the joint regional security stacks this past fiscal year. So we are already into the joint environment with the JRSS stacks, and the Air Force comes on board this month. And so one of the challenges that we will have going forward is working with our sister services. And we're working out the TTPs and how to work together, but that happens this month. And so that'll be a challenge we look forward to, though, because that is absolutely the way we want to go.
I actually wanted to ask you about the Joint Regional Security Stacks. Would you say that that's the centerpiece of your modernization effort, or where does it fit in? And I know you said that the Air Force is joining next month, but I wanted to see where you are in your timeline and what's coming up with that.
Great question. So from the Army standpoint, we've been messaging, it's three parts. It's the campus area network upgrade, which is upgrading the switches, the infrastructure, the local area network. It's the optical backbone, which is primarily a key partnership with DISA. But then the centerpiece really is the joint regional security stacks. Because at the end of the day, this is about security. It's not just about great transport, which we'll have, but it's about hardening and defending the network that we use today. And so to go from literally, over 100 points of presence that connect directly to the internet down to just 23 or 25 across the services really does tighten up, the security footprint that we have to defend. So it's much more defendable.
Excellent, thank you. And speaking of cybersecurity, Mr. Mazzello, we know that cybersecurity threats are, just continuing to grow in concern for both commercial and military networks. Can you talk about what the Army is doing to address the concern and help with the network readiness?
Sure, I'm going to talk from the perspective of the existing network today, the existing programs of record. So within the C4ISR domain, we make heavily leveraged commercial investments in communication technology, IT, networking technologies. We take those commercial products, commercial off-the-shelf or COTS products, we integrate them into programs of record, and then we deploy that required, needed capability. But that comes at a cost. We have to pay annual maintenance license fees to many different commercial vendors. We are working with the department to implement enterprise license agreements so we can get a better value for those license agreements. Within the C4ISR domain, we're developing or implementing ELAs, enterprise license agreements, that are unique to our domain, specifically within CCOM, POC3T, POIWS. From a security perspective, those COTS products have some vulnerabilities, and you'll know that from your home environment, your PC or your phone, where you get security patches, IAVA patches on a monthly basis. The Army networks, Army systems have those same vulnerabilities. Typically in the past, we had pushed out patches using physical media on a quarterly basis. We understand that that's not secure enough. That doesn't provide security to our networks. We have changed the frequency of our patching. We're updating that to a monthly basis. We're also migrating from a physical media distribution to electronic distribution of security patches, similar to how you would see, or what you would see in an office or home environment. We've conducted some pilots at Fort Bragg, Fort Campbell, and now we have implemented with the 82nd Airborne, the 108th AD, and the 82nd CAB, where we will electronically push the patches to those units. That gets away from manual distribution, allows us to make our networks more secure and provide those patches in a much more robust process. So that's a paradigm shift that the Army is making from legacy processes to processes that are needed really to address the continuing cyber threats and vulnerabilities that we're seeing today. For the future, we're implementing what we like to term software assurance. So in the past, when you developed code, you would manually inspect the code to see if it met coding standards or coding practices. That is unattainable today with the millions of lines of code that are in our programs of record. So we are using automated tools to assess the code as that software is being developed, either for programs of record as they're in development, or for when we make sustainment releases to those programs of record that are fielded. This allows us to understand, identify exploitable vulnerabilities in advance of that software being fielded, so the developers can take that information, make the corrections before those systems or that software goes to the field. So we're really trying to get ahead of the problem from a software perspective.
Left of boom in the network.
Pardon?
Left of boom in the network.
Left of boom, yes. It's critical that we get there given the exponential growth of software in our programs of record.
You mentioned some pilot projects that you had. I was wondering if you could talk about what are some of the lessons learned that have come out of that, and what have you gained so far from those? So
the lessons learned are the mechanism that we want to use to distribute those is the same mechanism that the Army uses on its strategic networks. We use a Microsoft product, SCCM, Service Center Configuration Manager. We need to make sure that units have the capability and expertise to distribute that. That was a challenge when we initially conducted the pilot. We need to make sure that we have a standard portal where a unit can go to. In the past, our practice was to mail, as I said, physical media. We've partnered with not only both POs, ForceCom and NetCom, so we've established a portal where the units can go and take that patch, download that patch. So there's a central repository that didn't exist before. We have that in both NIPR and a CIPR configuration. So those are two lessons learned that we've implemented or integrated as we now roll this out at Fort Bragg. We are also stretching or extending this to other installations, other programs of record. We have about 10 programs of record that we have implemented this process. We're rolling it out to JBLM probably at the first of the year. So we have some significant work, but I think it really gets after the vulnerabilities that we face today.
Excellent. So it sounds like there's a lot of transition away from legacy systems, legacy ways of doing things. Generally, you alluded to culture change. I'd be interested in hearing from each of your perspectives. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what are you coming up against in terms of culture change, and how are you addressing that within your organizations? Maybe if you want to start.
I'll take the lead on that. So we have to prove that the to-be system is better than the as-is system today, right? And have and show that we have confidence in where we're going. And already, anecdotally, we are seeing improvement in the local area infrastructure, local area network infrastructure, where now customers or users on the network are having a better experience with the network in many cases. And so to be able to prove that first is important. It's kind of a chicken or the egg, and someone had to be first. And so we did get a few bases to get out there, get out front. Fort Hood was first for us, and then a number of other bases came online. And so as they came online and demonstrated the improvements, then it made it easier for others to say, okay, this is okay for us. So someone's got to be first. And that was the Southwest region for CONUS for us in our case. But we are already reaching over to Europe and to Southwest Asia to move in that direction. It's a culture change. And I will say that in addition to proving that it works so that we have confidence in it, it really is, and for the three of us, a multi-tiered approach to communicating. And so it's not enough to communicate just at the senior level. The communication has to go at the senior, the mid, and the AO level to ensure that we are all in sync. And that's not easy to do. There are a lot of stakeholders that are involved in all the things that we work on, and to stay in sync is a challenge in itself. But fortunate for us, Gary Martin, the C3T, and CCOM team, and great partners in the things that we do. And although today we're talking about three different areas, there are intersections with the three of us, our organizations, and that communication is critical. So that's a big part of getting after the culture change.
And Mr. Martin, I know so much of what you do at C3T is what ends up in the hands of soldiers, so I can imagine there's a lot of cultural change involved there. Can you talk a little bit about what you're facing and how you address it?
I think we're at an interesting point because our users are fairly tech savvy, right? If you look at the average soldier is probably a 21-year-old kid who grew up very comfortable around technology. Mm-hmm. So I think their appetite to take technology and evolving technology is probably greater than my generation. And certainly there's a bit of expectation in terms of our ability to deliver capability as fast as they can consume it. Part of the culture change that's going on, some it's culture, some it's procedural, but the acquisition process is not the most nimble in terms of delivering emerging technology capabilities. I think our Chief of Staff, our AE, Ms. McFarland, are working very hard to look at how to improve the way we modify the acquisition process, particularly for, I think, my space, right, where technology moves much quicker than we can adopt it. So I think our consumer is far more willing to take on new capability. The system is a little bit more lethargic and struggles a little bit more in terms of how to deliver emerging technology on a quick basis. And there's a balance there because you have to have the ability to train and provide the infrastructure to operate, maintain, and so forth. So we got to certainly balance the speed at which we move and that customers want us with the fact that it's a very complex integrated network that has to be trained, has to be proficient, and that's sort of the space that we're in right now.
Absolutely. And Mr. Muzzello, is cultural change something that you're coming up against at CCOM?
So at CCOM, I mentioned the physical media, so we have capability to produce hundreds of thousands of CDs a year. And that was sort of the method we were using for many, many years. And so when you shift from that to an electronic distribution, there's sort of an organizational mindset of this is how I'm going to patch it, but we understand from a leadership perspective, we need to really change our business processes, and people really saw that to get after it, you can't update or provide security updates on a quarterly basis through physical media. So we had sort of the organizational inertia was overcome by both leadership and by the fact that we have a real challenge in the Army that everybody rallied around and let's look at a new way of doing business.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the culture changes going on today is, my world typically dealt in buy and equip soldiers. Architecture work comes out of CIOG6, and the CCOM folks tend to do the sustainment on the other side. I think we're seeing culturally, within our organizations, and Garrett alluded to it, the crosstalk that's going on today in terms of understanding how we leverage the capability of multiple organizations to address the fielding, the innovation that we're bringing to the field, as well as the ability to sustain and operate it, really requires a team sport. And I'm seeing a level of integration culturally across the organization that's improving over where we've come from, which I think is a positive thing.
Absolutely.
And I might add to something that Gary said earlier, and that was, we have a bunch of 21-year-olds out there using this stuff, right? They're demanding change as well. And so for us, it's our job to deliver that. And now we can't deliver as fast as we'd like, but the demand signal is there. And it's coming from those 21-year-olds that are using that stuff in the field, and that thread gets pulled all the way back from that little tactical device to the larger tactical devices to the back end on the strategic network. So that thread is being pulled all the way back by that 21-year-old soldier out there in the field with the radio in their hand.
Absolutely. That actually is a nice segue to my next question. So you're talking about the 21-year-old soldier who's used to operating an iPhone, really easy to do, but we know that a lot of soldier feedback from the various training centers and operational rotations are still indicating that network systems are pretty complicated to set up and to integrate. So what are you doing to reduce complexity? And so what are some of the key issues that you're hearing about?
I think there are two main parts to that, one of which is the technology that we're providing. And the second part is how do we build proficiency? Because although we leverage a tremendous amount of commercial technology, most of these are not iPhones or the kind of technology that they're comfortable using. And so, on one case, on the deliver side, I talked in the first question in terms of unburdening what it takes to initialize and get the network up. Today, if you go out into a unit, you physically have to touch every radio in every vehicle in order to initialize it with the ComSec keys, the parameters they need to operate. If for some reason you lose power or if radio goes down and you replace it, you have to physically go back to that particular radio. So the over-the-air management that we're delivering later this year will clearly unburden a lot of what soldiers have been struggling with. Because as you know, if you use an iPhone, you don't load anything. You turn it on, hit a couple of buttons, and away you go. And so trying to take what is typically administrative network operations off of the user's back, I think will significantly eliminate some of the criticisms that we've had, especially configuring automated devices. On the training side, we're working very hard with the folks at CCOM and ForceCom, because a typical unit today, we go in and field a fairly complex network. Satellite terminals, the mission command systems, the radio systems, to a unit that doesn't have it. We do net training and it takes 20 some odd weeks to complete a complete training. Then we leave and go to the next fielding. In many cases, these are general purpose user systems, so there's no school for them to go to get trained. They have to build proficiency inside their units. Usually we leave and weeks later they start their summer rotation and a new set of soldiers come in who have never been trained on this. And so there's this constant churn of having to retrain folks. So we're working very closely with the Mission Command training centers at each post camp and station, the signal universities that CCOM owns and operates, to pre-position new methods of providing sustainment training, videos, simulation training, so they don't have to physically have the network up and operational in order to get proficient on it.
Absolutely, great. And so since we're talking about the end user, General Yee, not talking about the technology itself, but as you're modernizing the network, what will be different for the soldier?
Well, I think going forward, we have just released an RFP for unified capabilities, which will allow the soldier to be untethered from the workstation and to be able to have the things that you have on your iPhone today with you and not have to sit down at a desk. And so that is one big change with the release of the RFP that will eventually get us there. It's not going to get us there next year or the year after, but it's the first step in really being able to untether the user from the workstation. But I would like to just say something about the complexity piece. Our network is complicated, and to manage a network takes a lot of training, a lot of skill, a lot of contract support to maintain and manage our network today. And I'm talking more on the networking side versus the application. So what the Army and the industry hasn't done as good a job with is simplifying how to manage a network. Now we simplify through applications how to do things, like your iPhone, hit a button, and now I have a parking application. That's on the application side. On the networking side, we still have a long ways to go. And so the Army is looking forward beyond just what we're doing today and looking towards software-defined networking, which will allow the network to be easier to manage and use for end users and operators.
If you think of the analogy, the technologies we're putting out in the field today are the same technologies that provide enterprise services in the office environment. I don't care whether you're in banking, schooling, government service. Most of us have an IT department whose job it is to keep that network up. They don't take it down every day, they don't move it, they don't read it. Their job is essentially when it breaks or they need to reconfigure it. We package that in ruggedized format, give it to 21-year-old kids who aren't 10-year veterans of ISSP certified operators and so forth, and they pack it, they move it, they reinstall it, they have to operate it, initialize it, maintain it. That's a lot of demand that we're putting on our young soldiers, and I think they're up to the task, but the training component to that gets a lot more challenging than the environment that you live in at work or that I live in at work, where my IT department has folks that are probably 10, 15-year veterans of running the network and simply maintaining it to be up and operational. So we put a lot of complexity on soldiers at a very young age, and so the training component to this has to be a little different than what we've thought about in the past.
Absolutely. And speaking of some of that equipment, the tactical data radios, WinT, the mission command systems, a lot of these started fielding 5 or more years ago. You have the manufacturer warranties coming up to expire. Mr. Mazzella, maybe you can talk a little bit about what the Army is doing in terms of sustainment of those systems.
Sure. So our Integrated Logistics Support Center works closely with the Programming Executive Officer or the PMs as systems go out of warranty. We'll work with the PM to provide spares so we can provide supply, put spares in the supply pipeline. The elements we'll take, or steps we'll take as those warranties will expire, is we'll look for sources of repair. That could be through national maintenance contracts. It could be through the organic industrial base, in our case, Tobyhanna Army Depot. It could be a public-private partnership with the OEM of that particular product, or a combination thereof. Additionally, we'll have to modify our databases, logistics modernization program specifically, to understand or to account for the increased density of equipment that we'll now have to sustain and replenish. We'll have to work with the OEM or the PM's OEM to identify failure rates so we can understand the demand on those spares and make sure we have enough spares in the pipeline so when requisitions come in, we can fill those requisitions. One of the challenges we have though, as those warranties expire, what had been happening in the past is the unit would go to the OEM who has the warranty, and now we have to switch where that requisition goes, in our case to CCOM or to the depot. That is a huge shift for an individual soldier. So we're looking to deal with that warranty on the back end, so the soldier only has to put a requisition into one place. He doesn't have to go to the prime and then switch over to the Army Standard Supply System at some point in time later on. Additionally, specifically in the mission command systems, those are really commercial laptops, commercial servers. Those have an end of life. And so we haven't adjusted our process really to account for the Army's heavy use of commercial laptops and commercial servers. What we've typically done in the past is a tech refresh. We will take out the old systems, and 5 years in or so we'll have a new server or a new laptop provided to the units. That's not going to work long term. So we're trying to adapt our processes so that as a unit requisitions for a new laptop, we can do the lifecycle refresh through the Army Standard Supply process. There are some things we have to work as far as changing the type or class of supply that is. We have to make sure that the software that's being provided in response to that funded requisition works on the new laptop. But those are things that we understand we have to adapt our process to the new paradigm shift of commercial technology, commercial hardware in use in the field today.
Absolutely. Well, I think this has been a really great update on network modernization in the Army. Thank you all so much for joining us today. For more on network modernization and more coverage from AUSA, please visit c4isrnet.com.